Good morning. I'm going to read through The Legacy of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. You can see it on your screen as well, so you can follow along as I read. Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, published in 1962, was a landmark in the development of modern environmental movement. It explained how the indiscriminate application of agricultural chemicals, pesticides, and other modern chemicals polluted streams, damaged bird and animal populations, and caused severe medical problems for humans. Silent Spring sparked widespread debate about the effect of pesticides in the natural world, leading to new policies that protect our air, water, and health and safety. The book promoted a major shift in how chemists practiced their discipline and helped establish a new role for chemists in investigating the impact of human activity on the environment. The legacy of Silent Spring continues today in the chemistry community's focus on green chemistry practices and the public's support for sustainability. Progress after World War II. To understand how radically her book changed the modern mindset, we have to go back to the era between World War II and the late 1950s, when Carson first decided to write Silent Spring. New technologies flourished during the war as biologists, chemists, physicists, and others aided the military. Science and industry then translated these and other developments into products aimed at improving the quality of life for civilians. DDT, dichloryl diphenyl trichloroethane, is one example. A potent insecticide, DDT was effective at preventing the spread of typhoid, malaria, and other diseases transmitted by insects, and it saved countless lives during the war. After the war, the U.S. Department of Agriculture and corporations promoted DDT and other powerful chemicals to increase domestic productivity and combat a variety of ills. DDT's widespread use is reflected by the range of products in which it was sold, from large-scale aerial sprays to insecticidal wall paint and wallpaper. Carson, who was employed with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service from 1936 until 1952, was, or as a field scientist and writer, was acutely aware of the policies and practices of the day. In her view, government leaders and industry were eager to create sweeping change, but were advancing new technologies without knowing the full implications of their decisions. Master of Two Worlds. Rachel Carson was one of the few people capable of writing with the scientific thoroughness her subject required and the engaging writing style that could rivet a nation's attention. She was born in 1907 in Springdale, Pennsylvania, a rural river town outside of Pittsburgh. By age 11, she was winning writing competitions. She entered the Pennsylvania College for Women, now Chatham University, to pursue a writing career. But after classes in biology, Carson changed majors, graduating in 1929. She earned a master's degree in zoology at Johns Hopkins University in 1932. In 1951, The Sea Around Us elevated Carson to fame and cemented her credentials as an interpreter of science for the public. The book was a bestseller and won a National Book Award. In her acceptance speech, Carson outlined her beliefs about the public's interest in science. Many people have commented with surprise on the fact that a work of science should have a large popular sale. But this notion that science is something that belongs in a separate compartment of its own, apart from everyday life, is one that I should like to change. Science is part of the reality of living. It is the what, the how, and the why of everything in our experience. It is impossible to understand man without understanding his environment and the forces that have molded him physically and mentally. Silent Spring, a change in perspective. In Silent Spring, Carson assembled information on chemicals used in aerial sprayings, in industrial settings, and on food. She characterized the impact of these agents in ecological terms rather than simply portraying the effectiveness of the chemicals. Carson did extensive research, citing dozens of scientific reports, conducting interviews with leading experts, and reviewing materials across disciplines. Silent Spring seeded important new ideas in the public mind that spraying chemicals to control insect populations can also kill birds that feed on dead or dying insects, that chemicals travel not only through the environment, but through food chains, that chemicals can accumulate in fat tissue, causing medical problems later on, and that chemicals can be transferred from mothers to their young. Paramount among these ideas was the notion that life is much more interconnected and interdependent than people had realized. Yet, Carson called not for an outright ban on agricultural chemicals, but for caution, further study, and the development of biological alternatives. When Silent Spring was released in the fall of 1962, it was met with an enormous public interest as well as substantial criticism. Many government leaders, including President John F. Kennedy and his Secretary of the Interior, Stuart L. Here we go, Udall, took Carson seriously. Others criticized her vehemently. William J. Darby authored a review of The Silent Spring titled Silence, Miss Carson, in the October 1st, 1962 issue of Chemical and Engineering News, published by the American Chemical Society. Darby criticized Carson for not adopting the views of responsible, broadly knowledgeable scientists and recommended that, in view of her scientific qualifications in contrast to those of our distinguished scientific leaders and statesmen, this book should be ignored. Rachel Carson's legacy. But Carson's book was not to be ignored. Her research and ideas became central testimony at two congressional hearings and a Presidential Science Advisory Committee report on pesticides in 1963 affirmed Carson's call for limits on pesticide use, and further research into their health hazards. Carson and her book are frequently cited as the catalyst that inspired the environmental movement that began in the 1960s and gained national and international momentum by the 1970s. The years following the controversy over Silent Spring saw the establishment of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and the passing of numerous laws that protect the environment and human health, including a ban on domestic use of DDT in 1972. Since the publication of Silent Spring, the discipline of chemistry has grown to include green chemistry, the design, development, and implementation of chemicals, products, and processes that reduce energy use and lower or eliminate the use of or generation of substances hazardous to the environment and human health, and a new role for chemists in investigating the impact of human activity on the environment. Scientists, policymakers, and the public now recognize the way trade-offs of new technologies. Several generations have grown up embracing Carson's ideals of ecological awareness, environmental protection, and conservation. A more telling measure of how attitudes have changed is reflected in a letter penned by Rudy M. Baum, editor-in-chief of Chemical and Engineering News, published in the June 4, 2007 edition. At a time when humans largely believed themselves to be apart from nature and destined to control it, Carson argued passionately that nature is, in fact, a network of interconnections and interdependencies, and that humans are a part of that network and threaten its cohesion at their own peril. What is mainstream today was heretical in 1962. Carson, who died in 1964, inspired a new paradigm of thinking, where humanity is not the center of life on Earth, but part of nature. The legacy of Silent Spring continues today in the scientific community's increased focus on environmentally friendly practices and the public's heightened support for sustainability in all areas of life.